How's it going? We got some crazy delays here. Yeah, it's been a while. It feels weird. It feels weird to be talking in the room with no one here again. Yeah, I've been working, winding down for a much needed break. So I haven't done a video in a while. I have tried to do a video a few times, but yeah, just sometimes it just doesn't work. I think largely just trying to do a video is the wrong approach. I think just sitting around and having a jam and then recording it is how I've done most of them. So I think that's always a better way. So what have we got going on here? I've been listening to, as I always do, let me get my phone because I can remember the titles. I've been listening to Richie Hawtin's, wow, this delay is crazy. Let's turn this down a bit. It kind of sounds cool though. Oh, actually, I think the sound's still going. Yeah, it is. Let's have this in the background. Forklift truck reversing. Maybe we can put some bass. But yeah, Richie Hawtin's Computer Space, if you've not heard of that, it's one of the old stuff he done under the F.U.S.E alias, of which there are many. Actually, it's interesting. It says it's the 25th anniversary, which just means he's cashing in. I think it has an album mix, which I've not listened to. It's like almost an hour, but I think it's just basically the same tracks in a long mix. Anyway, like it's the 25th anniversary, so you can get it on all your favorite streaming platforms. I think he's on Bandcamp and stuff. Anyway, it's listed as Richie Hawtin and F.U.S.E, which is don't even know what that means. It's the same person. But anyway, the Computer Space release has like, as I understand it, and I might be wrong here, but like it's using the, I think it's the Akai S950. I don't have an S950. I have the S900, which is basically the same without the time stretch. I think the operating system's a bit better on it, on the old Akai samplers. And he's kind of sampled, I think, the 303, like a sweep of the 303, and then he's kind of created a whole load of modulation and stuff in the Akai using that 303 sort of sound, which is pretty cool. And it's just, I mean, that on its own maybe doesn't sound exciting, but what he does with it is just create. I think it's also this is around the time he done the collaboration with Pete Namlook, who I'm a big fan of, and there's a slower pace that you don't typically get with like Richie's stuff, even the early stuff. Maybe like to a degree his Sheet 1 album in places, but there's a kind of like prolonged, slow, kind of dub influenced, but heavily ambient sort of influenced sort of sound that's mixed with this kind of techno sound, I guess. He kind of was, that has now been known for. Interestingly, I didn't really regard Richie Hawtin or Plastic Man, as I kind of was into at the time, as really techno. It was something very different, so it's interesting. I think he's a really interesting person, or creative, I guess, that represents like quite a shift over his kind of career, I guess. I'm not just a FYI, I'm not really a fan of his stuff, or have been for a really, really long time. I don't know, just, you know, people's creative choices go in different directions, and whatever he was doing, whatever his output sounded like in those sort of early 90s, early to mid 90s, was just hit the spot for me. Just different era, right? Like people just channel that stuff in their own sort of ways, and there was a kind of a nice mix of combinations that this sounds quite cool in the background. Nice kind of combinations of stuff that sort of hits a spot that I quite like, that he hasn't really hit since. He's just doing different stuff, isn't he? He's like being a pop star or whatever. But yeah, the Computer Space one is really cool. And also like the other one, the Dimension, I'm looking at my phone off of camera. The Dimension Intrusion album is sort of a similar era, and it's quite different. It's kind of your more, I don't know, I really like it, right? It kind of sounds naff. It kind of just doesn't sound, there's some really classic stuff in there, but there's also some really like basic studio like experiments, I guess. And they can sound really innocent. And I really like that sort of stuff, not because, you know, like innocent in the sense of like, it doesn't sound like he's really got in his way of like creating stuff and sort of creating tracks and getting really particular about sound design, and he's just sort of little arpeggios and really sort of basic balanced sounds. Like the 909 on one of the tracks is just really weak. Like I use these words weak not to say that they are weak, but in a sort of like the description of something what you would recognize as his stuff, this seems like by that measure weaker. I really like it though. So don't think I mean weak as in it's crap, because I like good weak stuff. It sort of sounds, it sounds innocent. It sounds like, oh, I just need a drum machine in the background. I just need some sounds and we'll just put them through a delay. And it's kind of a fun like track. And if your mate had made it, you'd be like, yeah, that's cool, you know, but because he's made it, it's like, it's seen in her differently, I feel. Just because of the world we live in, I suppose. But yeah, basically I mentioned those two albums because I guess I've been listening to them quite a bit, and I really like that, along with the kind of Pete Namlook delay thing. If you've not heard Pete Namlook stuff, I'd recommend checking out like the Definitive Ambient Collection Volume 1. It's like a really good place to start. It's kind of where I started, sort of back in the 90s. And he has this sort of like dubby mixed with sort of ambient sound, but there's often this sort of, I'm moving my hands left and right because I'm trying to get to the description of the delay. So we'll have a delay that kind of goes, it'll kind of repeat in this pulse that goes sort of left to right to left, and then it'll just bounce sounds into it, and it creates these kind of really kind of interesting rhythmical patterns that are far more than the sort of sum of the parts, if that's the right expression. So this is kind of what I've been sort of doing here. So I was playing around with this the other day. Really wasn't feeling it, and wanted to kind of try a few different things out given the new operating system update, and just too much stuff in my head trying to barge into a fucking track or whatever, or a video or whatever. So I popped out, listened to this sort of Richie Houghton stuff, early Dimension Intrusion and Computer Space mainly, and it's just, I just love that album. It's just like oscillators and filters and delays and kind of like different textures, and the tracks are like ridiculously long as well. You know, the first track is, wow, it is really long, 37 minutes. The first track is 37 minutes, and then he's got a more kind of like techno-y version of the same sort of sounds, which is 7 minutes, and then the Sanctuary track is 18 minutes, and the last one's 5, which is kind of sort of similar. So there's just a real kind of slow pace, and just kind of getting lost in sort of colliding patterns and stuff. So that was kind of really what I was going for. We've got like, to sort of break down a little bit of what it is. I don't want to go into massive detail because it just takes too long, doesn't it? But I've basically got the key things I think I'm using is I'm using the SY SCHIP on each of the tracks, bar the bass drum, which is the bass tom. Which I'll get to, but the first one is kind of like the square wave sound, and there was a bump modulation, but I've removed it. So in the LFO section, there's a modulation. It's not doing anything, but it's basically a square wave, and that gives that kind of like old, like it reminds me of the 101 sort of square wave kind of quality. So that's kind of how I used it. The patterns on each of them are exactly the same using the Euclidean sequencer, but I think the timings are slightly different between each. So the length is like 10, 9, 8, just to kind of give this sort of movement. And they're offset, but that didn't really make much difference now. They're different lengths. They weren't different lengths originally. And then the second track is Sawtooth, and that's kind of, again, based on the 101. This originally was a square wave with modulation, but again, I removed the modulation. And I'll kind of explain why I did that in a minute. And then the last one is the square wave again, but with pulse modulation. So we've got that modulation going on, which is the other sort of other sound that kind of comes in and out. I think I've read somewhere that you can't modulate accurately the pulse width. You can. So you just need to set this to 50% and then just set this at a number that doesn't dip into the other waveforms, because to the left of that, there's these other waveforms. So if you put it on 50, then you've got, enough this way and enough that way to kind of modulate it. So you just whack it in the middle and then just turn up your LFO and then find a sweet spot that modulates enough, so it works fine. If you go, I think, beyond sort of 48 or whatever, it starts to cut out, or the pulse gets really, really thin, so it kind of goes into nothing a little bit. But and the bass tom can sometimes be really difficult to get this to sound good. Like out of the box, it's sort of a bit boo kind of, for impersonation. I find just like reducing the decay quite a bit and then just put in like a notch filter and then just kind of knocking the envelope in an interesting way that just moves that notch in a way that just kind of creates enough of a, drops out some of the frequencies on the initial hit, on the initial transient, and then you've got like the bit you can kind of hear the click or the sub, and then it moves in whatever way you want to pick up the boom afterwards. So it just seems to sit nicer. So I kind of done that. The other stuff is just basic subtractive like nonsense, right? Just low pass filters, nothing too fancy. The only other thing is the delay. So I always put, well, not always, but like if I'm using a delay, I find having a delay like locked to the tempo, it can be kind of useful, but I find it just becomes, there's just everything's on top of each other. And I just like things to be a bit looser. And I think this comes from, I grew up like using the Space Echo, which, you ain't going to get MIDI sync or any sync delay with that. It's just finding the rate, and then even then it like bloody moves all over the place because they're old, and the timing or rate dial as it is in the Space Echo just goes wobbly. The motors in it just kind of like give up and say, hey, I'm going to go quicker for a while. So there's that. And then I also used to use like the Elasis MIDI Verb 4 when I was a nipper, and which has got a time tempo thing, but you'd have to like tap it in. Or you could like use a particular program that you could set the tempo on. So there's only certain patches in there that will allow you to sync it. It wasn't like this, like baked in. And also like I used to use a Lexicon Alex as well, which I want to say it had a delay on it. It was a reverb effects, but basically, my point being is a lot of the effects that I used that when delays didn't really have this auto timing thing. So, and there's a lot to be found in stuff that isn't time for me. So I always whack the delay timing onto an LFO with these settings. So I can just, and then the cool thing with the Euclidean, you can just set it to be, it needs to trigger each step, or ideally. So you can have it trigger every step. And then every time it triggers, using that wave shape, it basically scans down through the wave, and you can approximate the timing. So like the multiplier and the speed is set at like 0 and 1, which means this doesn't move down the waveform. This is basically doing nothing. And the only way you can move it down and up and down the waveform is by adjusting the depth. So this is basically, when this going up and down is effectively going to the peak of the triangle and to the dip of the triangle. And that's mapped to time. So it means like you can adjust the timing on micro timings that you can't otherwise do on this page. So I often put it to the smallest setting, and then that means that if I put this to 0, it's like really short, but then you have this whole like 128 or what would it be, 64 probably, to just micro adjust it, which is really cool, which means you can get timing that's not fixed on. It's not fractions, it's off, or it can be on and off as you gradually adjust it. So I find that really, really useful. Definitely try that if you've not tried it. It just makes, for me, it just makes like trying to get like a track to have more complexity and more stuff to work with and extract and look like to work with when you're, I don't know if you do this when you're working with Elektron products, because there tends to be a kind of put in sort of approach. You have to put stuff in, but I very much like a bulk of crap sound, whatever, and then I sort of I suddenly notice stuff. You notice, oh wow, there's this combination of these these elements, this delay, this filter, this whatever, is producing something, and then having the ability to sort of highlight them or push them away or shift them or whatever is kind of how I basically make music, largely, like at least in the sense of those finer sort of textures and stuff. Very rarely I will put in like little clicks and sound design is perfect placement. I want it to do that for me. I don't want to spend the time doing it because it just drives me nuts. I have done it, but it just takes bloody ages, and it normally sounds shit. It normally sounds very like particular and perfect and precise and lifeless, to my taste at least. But yeah, I think that's it. There is what else was there? There was the modulation stuff. So on the velocity you can set like per channel, right? So you can kind of modulate these things, and this is kind of where I started off at, because I wanted to kind of use the keyboard tracking approach, which is something else actually. It's really important, that basically tracks the pitches by my manually inputting them, and then you can apply that tracking to whatever parameter you put it on. So typically I'd put it on like the filter, the frequency of the filter, and this is kind of like, I've mentioned this in loads of videos, but it's like a higher note needs to be brighter, and a lower note needs to be less frequencies, more filtered down, and that kind of resembles a lot of acoustic instruments and a lot of real life sounds. You get that. It's another feature you get on a lot of synthesizers, and you get that on the 101, Junos and loads of polys and stuff. You don't get that on this, which is understandable because it's kind of like a drum machine, drum computer, whatnot. So the way I kind of do that is, and I keep saying I'll do a video on this, but it's boring to do a video on something to do. Just work it out, man. Just follow, Anyway, so I just kind of basically, each of the notes that I've tracked in, using the Google sheet in the description, I map to a different velocity, and then so the high ones are like this one's F#4, plus 18 off of the middle C, and it's 100 velocity, whereas this is lower, so therefore it's a lower velocity. This one's even lower still, so this one's middle C, so it's 64. And if it was lower than that, if it was a minus, I don't know if there is a minus in it. Yeah, a -6, it's lower. So that's kind of the idea. And then you can map that velocity if you turn the volume off, because otherwise you'll get volume changes with that as well, which can be useful. You can map it to the filters and stuff. But what I've done in here is I realized you can map it to the pitch of the side chip. And they've kind of changed. Elektron have changed, I believe, like the way the scaling works. Because you've got scaling and stuff in here, but the way that it maps, the pitch maps, it's more accurate. Because before it used to just go a bit wonky, but now it really has a kind of like musicality, and it's sort of it feels like you're shifting key, and it feels locked in. So you get this very, for what I would describe as kind of modular quality, if that makes sense. It's like by turning a dial you can kind of scale kind of bounce off into different pitches quite quickly, which is something you don't typically get at with synthesizers. They're like, you've got a keyboard and you've got a pitch and you've got a tune and stuff. With modular, you can just kind of patch in and create these kind of interesting stuff, which is basically what this is. It's the modular page. So you can map that velocity to whatever. In this case, it's the pitch of the side chip, the filter, the decay, which is really useful to create body in higher or lower notes, and then the filter envelope. And I think it's similar for most of them, if not in a different order. But yeah, that's really useful. Like, it really changes being able to make a simple little arpeggio kind of pattern or a little sequence or whatnot to be something a lot more natural. That's a complete bullshit term for it, but it has movement. It feels like it's got, it adjusts with what's being heard, as opposed to it being sort of triggered specifically on here. The only thing I did actually trigger on here was the kick drum or bass tom or whatever that had there seems to be loads on this one. So there's like I pitched down this one to have a more subby kind of feel, lowered the volume, and then changed the amplitude envelope, just to give it a bit softer, so it's a bit more sub. So this is kind of that third, like number 3. I mean, it's hidden under the delay, which is the other thing I added. So if I turn that delay off, you can hear it, which arguably, just on its own, sounds better. Yeah, kind of sounds cool. And the other thing, I just added delay on it just to kind of create like a movement or texture, which is kind of fun. So I kind of really like the idea of sound can, like a basic sequence has already got enough movement in it to be enjoyable, as opposed to like, you know, let's put the kick drum down and then build up stuff to get movement. It's like there's already movement going on. So it's a kick drum sub, and there's also this like bonk on the third. I mean, there's obviously this thing in the background. Let's turn it off, which is cool. So you can kind of do stuff with a delay. So you wouldn't get that weird flanger build unless it was off, which is, you know, it's not exactly on a fraction, which is cool. Let's go through them quickly. So we got that, and then we've got this one. This one changed quite a lot. This is a square wave, and then, you know, we've got this filter. Which kind of works on the pitches, and then we've got, you know, this kind of idea. So there's that one. There's this one, which is the, which I believe this was like a higher pitch originally. So this was kind of up here. But you see what I mean when you change the pitch? You've got this almost, it reminds me a little bit of like Blade Runner. Like, not the same what I make is in any way as good as that guy, but what was his bloody name? Vangelis. But that kind of like, he uses lots of pitches that just slide in and out of stuff. It's got that kind of quality to it. It's a bit like jumpy, but so you can kind of use like the delay and excuse me, the delay and the brightness of a sound to kind of make a transition. So so for example, if I like this sort of idea. You know, just working with the filter, so you've not got like, you know, you can kind of change something, you can bring something in, drop something out as the filter's kind of making more noise, basically. Like, that's how I always do it. Like, if I need to get to a point and I don't know how to quite transition it, I just make a sound go loud, and then if it's running through delays or effects or whatever, then I can kind of like, oh, there's a bit of a space there. I can slowly introduce something. So just using the other sound to like to map it to mask it. And then there's this one, which is the one that's running. This is running through the. This is modulating the square wave, so it's a pulse wave. And this is kind of like a bit more your kind of classic synth sort of style, I guess. This is mapped to they're all mapped to here as well, like the volumes, and this one's just the frequency. But yeah, got like a kind of a glassy kind of quality, I suppose, like water-like thing because of the resonance. Anyway, you get the idea. So, I mean, that's basically it. Nothing too crazy. Same pattern, same process, just each one of them sort of changed. But yeah, it's kind of cool, kind of fun. Things can get a bit like out of hand, so I think you have to kind of balance like filters and stuff quite a bit, but it all feels like manageable. It all feels like a similar kind of similar process for each. It's like adjusting filters and adjusting waves and stuff. But yeah, that's kind of what I come up with. So it doesn't really sound like the Dimension, the computer space. My memory's so bad. Yeah, computer space. It's not really like that, but it's got that sort of. It's probably the Dimension intrusion, the computer space, bit of Namlook, arguably some old Speedy J kind of arpeggio stuff. There's all that kind of world in there, and then the dubby sort of element with just with the late delays or the lazy delays. So. But yeah, I'm going to upload the project as always. I've kind of redone the projects because I realized after I've been doing this for so long that it's actually difficult for, normally you could watch a video. Well, I imagine this is like the user flow, right? You go into the video, you watch it, you're like, oh, cool, that sounds good. You download the project. But if you're sort of downloading, once you've done that, you'd have to go to the most recent track on whatever the letters, I don't know what you would call these, like any of the groups that you would find a track in, right? So the rhythm was being full, like I think up to G was almost filled as well. So you'd have to kind of go to the latest one, and then some samples might not be in the project because they're removed if you go back to older ones. So it becomes a bit of a nightmare to manage. So what I've decided to do, just to make it a bit easier for myself even as well, is I'm just going to save the project, and it's going to be track 1 or however many tracks I decide to use, but it's going to basically be right at the start. So then you just download that project and press play, and that's it. And then if you want a different one, you just download a different project and press play. So at least that way you could potentially experiment with that track on other tracks, copy those sounds and develop it and have the space within that project to do so, as opposed to the project being full of everything that's ever been and previously, and then that not even necessarily work quite right. If you were going, if you downloaded the latest project and went back through all the previous sort of tracks, the settings might have sort of changed, especially with the new operating system update. I'm a bit unsure how compatible it is, like honestly, but it doesn't matter. It's a starting point. So yeah, that's going to make it easier. So I'm going to do that, and then if you're building a collection, you can organize however you want, I suppose. But yeah, so I'm going to upload that one and see if it's useful. But yeah, for sure, I think I'm going to play around with the synths a bit more. The SY SCHIP, I've hardly touched it. Like the only thing I've really done is the Pulse Width stuff. I think like the other waveforms are pretty cool. Like you get some weird glitchy things in there. I don't want to go into the computer music, like old school arcade sort of sound territory, but I don't know, maybe I will. I really love the sound on Ant Attack. If you've ever played that game, I mean, you'd have to be really old to have played it. I think it's the very first game that ever come out for the ZX81, which is the Sinclair ZX81 was the first ever computer that they built, I believe, or at least on production line, and it had a really weird like clicking kind of thing. It might have been on the 48K as well, but it had like basically just clicks and basses as this ant would like walk around and like chase little badly drawn characters in a maze. It's pretty cool. I think it was in a maze. Oh no, it was in a city actually. It was in a city because there was another one that was like a dinosaur in a maze. Anyway, I digress. I think I might do something like that. That'd be quite cool because I really like the sound of it. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there because this video is quite long. The jam was quite long. If you've listened this far, then hello. And if not, then I guess it doesn't matter, does it? Cool. I will catch you in the next one. Cheers.